Okay, so now we have Julio and Dennis, right? Are you there? Are you already co-host? Yes?
If so.
I don't see you, Julio. Where are you? Oh,
Here.
okay. I see you. Okay. Hi.
You see me properly?
Not yet. Yes.
Good.
Okay.
And I hear that we are on YouTube, right?
Yes. If you don't want to, just let us know.
It's fine. It's fine. Just because, you know, some people ask me for the link, so I don't want them to be wasting their time.
Okay. So do you want us to send the link again, or do you have it?
No, I'm saying that if it's not
Okay,
going to be...
it's already in the chat, the link.
Exactly.
Okay, and I will let you know 5 minutes before 20 minutes. You have half an hour in the total.
Yeah.
So before 20 minutes, I tell you 5 minutes for 20 minutes. Okay, is that clear? Okay, so, good. Okay, so thank you, and Julio and Denise, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So today I'm going to be talking about the phenomenon of recomplementation, multiple complementizer clauses with special attention to Spanish. I've sent the link to the handout in case you want to have a look at the PDF later on, or when it comes to the questions, it's then. So I will concentrate on a subset of the arguments that I will be giving here for a paratactic account or by clausal, by sentential account of recomplementation. By the way, I dedicate this to Paul Lancianese, the late linguist, who was also in love with the problem of multiple complementizer clauses. So let's actually get our hands dirty. Multiple complementizer clauses, in case you're not familiar, are illustrated for Spanish in 1A and 1B. Dice que a tu madre que la invitaron. Basically, we have a sandwich dislocated phrase that is flanked by over complementizers, as you can see here in 1. Okay, so you see one complementizer and another complementizer. The phenomenon has been attested in many languages, for instance, Asturian, Catalan, at least in European Portuguese, and English is not an exception, as you can see in 2, okay? She knew that if Diana was that unhappy, that the marriage really would have no future, okay? So these multiple complementizers have been subject to much controversy in the literature. Most theories to date are what we call integrated or monosentential multi-clausal analysis. In other words, cases of hypotaxis, where what happens is that you have a very rich, very developed, if you want, or articulated left periphery of the clause in such a way that you populate different specifiers and heads of the left periphery. So if you take 3A as an example, this would be the typical example of CP recursion, that topic, that, and so on and so forth. And a more rich and style analysis has been proposed, for instance, in my previous work, as you can see in 3B, with the high K or that in force in the highest head of the left periphery, then a tu madre in a topic position in a specifier, whose head is lexicalized by the secondary K. Okay, this type of analysis has a lot of empirical advantages, but it also this type of analysis also comes with a number of problems, and the problems are not limited to the following, but the major ones we have identified include the fact that there is always an intonational break between the sandwich dislocate and the secondary complementizer. They told me that Mary, that she's not coming, okay, that intonational break. There's issues with connectivity, as we will see in a minute, and anti-connectivity as well, which is kind of a paradox at first sight. Then there's the issue of extraction. The secondary complementizer creates an effect that is analogous to that of an island, and that has also resisted principled account. Similarly, we will see that the second K actually depends on the first one, okay? So for the second K to be licensed or legitimate in the structure, the first one needs to occur. Then there's also the issue of the complementizers being the same when they are reduplicated. Finally, the issue of selection. Okay, not all embedding predicates allow for a complement clause whose periphery allows for multiple complementizers. And finally, no double complementizers can occur with clitic right dislocation, okay, assuming some sort of right word specifiers, for instance, in the right periphery. These are in general problems for monoclausal, monosentential, or monosentential multi-clausal analysis, and we will see that all of these vanish under our paratactic account. So what we are proposing here for these multiple that, multiple case sentences is a radical departure from monosentential approaches, okay, from hypotactic approaches, if you want, following the work of Ott, my second author, who is not here today. The idea is that when you have a left dislocated element, for instance, ese coche lo van a comprar, okay, and if this was animate and you had a differential object marking, we would have exactly the same. What happens there is basically that instead of having this element in a left peripheral position, you have CP1 and CP2 in such a way that you have ellipses, van a comprar ese coche, okay, as you can see here in 5b, and then you have a second clause there. Obviously, the clitic ultimately is going to end up being co-referential with ese coche, and that's how you get clitic left dislocation under Ott's approach. Ultimately, you just get ese coche, which is a survivor, a remnant of ellipsis, ese coche lo van a comprar, and that would explain the presence of the clitic, for instance, among many other things. But as I said, I'm going to focus on multiple complementizer clauses, which are the point of interest in this work. So the biclausality proposal for embedded dislocations in general follows the work of Ott. As you can see in 7, this would be a case of a clitic left dislocated phrase that is not sandwiched between complementizers. In other words, a regular case of embedded left dislocation. Okay, dice que a tu madre la invitaron. What we are claiming there is that there is the interpolation, okay, of a parenthetical fragment, a tu madre, surviving again ellipsis, which appears in between que and in the main clause, so to speak. Okay, sorry, in the clause, dice que a tu madre la invitaron. That would be for non-recomplementized cases. The interesting one for us, and this will be the focus throughout the presentation, is actually 8. Okay, for us, recomplementation basically consists of one sentence, a root sentence, and another root sentence. Then there is ellipsis mediating, and ultimately what you are going to get is dice que a tu madre que la invitaron. Okay, but what we assume is that in cases of multiple complementizers, we have two paratactic root clauses which are linked, as you can see, by parataxis. Okay, there is really no hypotaxis or embedding under our account, and this is the main claim, that we have the main verb that selects, okay, then we have ellipsis here. We're going to have the remnant of ellipsis, whatever it is. In this case, it's a case that looks like clitic left dislocation, and then we have a repetition of that root clause, so to speak, but it's not identical, dice que, and then we get this independent element there. Interestingly, as we can see here, this will make reference in text discourse to the element that appears to be in the same clause but is not. Okay, so basically here we have a case of juxtaposition. We have CP2 on the one hand, CP2 on the other. They are parallel, obviously modulo the difference between the flank dislocate and the elliptical CP1. In this case, a clitic correlate. We will see that the correlate doesn't have to be a clitic. Okay. All right, so what are the ingredients for this kind of paratactic two-sentence account? Well, first of all, the type of ellipsis that we observe in 8 is independently available in Spanish. So if you consider embedded fragment answers, as in 9, you will see that dice que X is pretty normal in Spanish. For instance, 9a, ¿a quién han invitado? And B replies, me dijo Pedro que a María, okay? So notice how such fragments, Pedro dijo, me dijo Pedro, que a María, are legitimate in Spanish independently, okay? And obviously, you know, such fragments must involve some elided transitive verb, because it cannot be the case that que assigns accusative case to a Maria, for instance. Okay, so the assumption is that there is invitado elided in such fragments. Now, notice that we are here in 8. Sorry, where is 8? Okay, there. You can see that, you know, to retrieve, to recover this invitaron, this invited verb, obviously you need the postcedent first. So we are dealing here with a case, as shown in 10, of something similar to backward ellipsis, okay? Because you can only resolve the ellipsis once the postcedent CP2 has been uttered, okay? I don't know when, but they will crack the code, okay? I don't know when they will crack the code. Obviously, you need the postcedent first. So again, there is really nothing spectacular about that type of ellipsis in general in natural language. And notice that what we are claiming is that CP2, okay, the second root clause paratactically linked to the first one, is syntactically complete. So this is basically the same as a sequence of 2 separate root clauses, okay, which is our claim for recomplementation. So notice 11, dice que invitaron a tu madre, dice que la invitaron, okay? So for us, of course, there is ellipsis, there is different surface variants, but ultimately something along those lines, okay? 2 paratactic sentences, root clauses connected to each other. And in fact, the presence of the clitic in cases of recomplementized clitic left dislocation, or of a correlate more generally, for us is the result that the second clause, the second sentence needs to be a syntactically complete one. And English actually highlights this point. So if you look at 12, they told me that Peter, that they like him. These sentences are kind of marginal. You know, recomplementation in generally spoken is kind of not canonical, but notice how when you have the resumptive, which would look like kind of hanging topic, the thing is fine because that they like is a complete sentence syntactically. But when you have a case of what we have called fronting, as in 12b, they told me that Peter, that they like, the sentence fails. Why? Because that they like is now syntactically incomplete, okay? And that would account for why the second case does not allow recomplementation, okay? Now, how about the survival of the second complementizer? Okay, we are eliding things. Why does the second complementizer survive? Well, we claim this is a way of signaling a restarting discourse. We are kind of starting again. Intuitively, that's what recomplementation is about. It's some sort of reduplication, some sort of repetition, right? So basically what we have here is similar in the sense that there are cases such as clausal fragments where you do have the complementizer overtly. And this is a way of kind of signaling discourse again, right? It's a new way of link, it's another way of linking the sentences. ¿Qué te ha contado el señor gramático? Que la recomplementización es intrigante, right? That recomplementation is intriguing. In Spanish, that would be obligatory. And this is very similar to what we are claiming happens in CP2 in these cases. So, in general, one thing we want to make clear is that there is really nothing stipulative or special about the types of ellipses that we are assuming occur in this paratactic configuration that masks recomplementation, okay? And now we'll look at several arguments. There are 9 in total as far as we can tell so far. So I will just focus on a subset of them in the interest of time, okay? So one very quick one has to do with intonation. I mentioned this at the outset. The recomplementation, the secondary that or que, implies that there's going to be an intonational break before it. And typically, people, when they report this in the literature, they use a comma. Me cuentan que ese tipo, que no lo tragan in 14a. And if you look at 14b, they said that if I keep writing this email, that I will miss my plane. Okay, so there is this intonational break, which we believe is fully compatible with our assumptions here. You have CP1 and you have CP2. Each of them has its intonational phrase, okay? And there is no issue there. We actually predict that there will be this break because we are talking about 2 root clauses that are paratactically connected. So it's like a semicolon kind of intonation. Me dijeron que a María, que no la invitaron, okay? And that we think is fully compatible with our account. As I said, you have the handout. Those of you who may have arrived late may not have it. So Cilene or Roberta, if you don't mind reposting it, that would be great, but you can follow the screen, I hope, okay? So let's quickly look at argument 2, and then I'll skip some of the others. Argument 2 talks about connectivity and anti-connectivity. Connectivity in the sense that, as we saw in example 1a, repeated here in 16 for convenience, you know, a tu madre bare structural case, we assume that it's accusative, right? That yeah, it's not really a preposition, but an accusative case marker. Well, this is kind of mysterious in the other analysis because, you know, unless you really move there across K, and we see in a minute that this K creates some sort of island, there is no instruction there, you know, how this creature gets case is a mystery. You know, under parataxis, this is not a problem at all. Invitaron assigns a tu madre, assigns case to a tu madre in a very natural, in a very run-of-the-mill case, is head to complement, okay? Similarly, invitaron also assigns accusative to the clitic in CP2. So they get case in parallel. There's really no issue there, no questions asked. Similarly, as we can see in 17, the flanked elements actually does observe reconstruction effects. Me dicen que esa foto de sí mismo, que al duque no le gusta nada, okay? They tell me that that picture of himself, that the duke hates it or doesn't like it at all. And it's interesting that even though this element is higher than this K, it may have been base generated according to previous theories in that position, in the flanked position between, in the position flank between complementizers. This would, you know, the fact that the sí mismo can be bound by el duque is a little bit mysterious there. Under parataxis, this is not really a problem at all. Me dicen que al duque no le gusta nada esa foto de sí mismo. So under CP1, al duque is structurally higher than the sí mismo, so they can properly bind it in satisfaction of condition A of the binding theory. How about anti-connectivity? Because this is a little bit of Cinque's paradox, right? You display movement and not movement properties simultaneously. Well, it seems that no condition B effect arises, okay? Actually, this is a bit surprising because if a tu madre, for instance, the sandwich element, as we can see on this tree in 19, is actually there in spec CP or spectro P position, there is no way to prevent C command of that element. Sorry, C command of la, and it's a pronoun. According to binding theory principle B, that this element should, in theory, be free in its binding domain, and apparently it's not, okay? For us, this is not really a problem under biclausality because a tu madre and la are in different clauses. So the pronoun is totally free in its clause, or rather in its independent sentence, okay? So this is
5
basically,
minutes less.
thank you. Basically what we are claiming here is that you have something similar to 20. Conocieron a tu madre, la invitaron, okay? Where a tu madre is in a sentence and la is in another sentence, okay? So no problem there. An important case that I'm gonna talk about quickly is the fact that with multiple complementizers, you can have doubled subjects. These are, as Barbosa shows, very strange in null subject languages like Spanish. But when you do have multiple complementizers, that's fine. Dice que Hugo, que él no es así, okay? Under monoclausality, you are forced to tolerate double subjects, one in TP and the other in topic, okay? And they must be co-referential with each other. For us, under biclausality, no problem arises because you have Hugo in CP1 and you have co-referential L in CP2. Again, similarly to what happens in independent root clauses. Okay, so no questions asked. And I'm going to talk briefly about non-clitic correlates. When you have multiple complementizers, you know, you can actually have, for instance, an epithet, an epithetic correlate that also bears case a María and a la muy malvada. The spacing doesn't work very well here. Okay, the dative in this case, which is the same as accusative in form, cuentan que a María que no le dan nada a la muy malvada. This is not surprising at all under parataxis. Why? Because a María is in CP1 and a la muy malvada is in CP2, which is exactly as we see in 25, what happens in independent clauses. Odian a María, no le dan nada a la muy malvada. And importantly, in 26, we see that, you know, in recomplementation, we sometimes find even cases where there is no clitic per se. So for instance, when there is a quantifier, you don't undergo under regular clitic left dislocation, okay? So you don't have a clitic. What happens there is that in such cases, you need to repeat the quantifier itself. Remember that CP1 and CP2 need to be syntactically complete, okay? So, dice que nada, que no hizo nada. Notice how now repeating nada, which has no clitic, is obligatory in recomplementation. You cannot say, dice que nada, que no hizo. No, dice que nada, que no hizo nada. Nada is obligatory. You need to be syntactically complete in CP2. Same with todos, me contó que a todos, que invitaron a todos, you need a todos. And these cases clearly show, and they are quite decisive, that this is not just, some sort of clitic left dislocation moving. No, this position is not really topic related. It's just recomplementation, you're restarting, okay? And that's exactly what we expect. We need a syntactically complete CP2, and that's why we need to repeat the element. I'll skip 4, which is clausal negation, basically the idea that when you have some sort of negative quantified element that can still be topical because of the clitic, you need negation in the second one. Makes sense. CP1 has to be negative, CP2 has to be negative as well, so it follows. Extraction, which is an interesting case, I showed in earlier work, and this was followed by many people, including Torrego, Cerrudo, Aguilar and Gallego, Radford, and many others. The idea that when you have the second case in 29b, you have an island for extraction. Que me contaste que a tu novia que le habías regalado. Okay, so extraction across the second K is impossible. Monoclausal, monosentential analysis have suffered a bit in this regard. And the reason is that, most analyses claim that if you have K, you have an island. If you don't have an island. So if it's a phonological matter, the different accounts have struggled to account for that asymmetry. Under biclausality, the contrast between the ability to extract across embedded dislocation without double K and the impossibility of extracting across secondary K for us is pretty straightforward. Why? Because what you are trying to do here is to extract across sentence boundaries. And we know that extraction is cross-clausal. It's a matter of hypotaxis, you're not able to extract across sentences, independent sentences, and that's exactly what we assume the structure of recomplementation is, CP1 and CP2. Therefore, there is no cross-sentential extraction movement there, okay? There's another prediction there that I'm gonna skip for reasons of time. 3.6 talks about argument 6, interdependence of complementizers. Here I will just mention something which is relevant, the fact that, we basically claim that this element is some sort of discourse marker. The second K restarts discourse. It's a way of signaling, hello, there's this complement clause here. I'm restarting the story again, okay? And in fact, you can have a bona fide, a genuine discourse marker preceding the second K. Dice que como no hay dinero, pues que no va, for instance, okay? Where you have something like then. And it's interesting that, for us, these restarts are important even in the absence of the dislocate. So the dislocate is really not a sine qua non condition for recomplementation. Notice things like 37a, dice que la invitaron, which occur all the time in speech, right? Dice que la invitaron, some sort of reflective pause. 37b dice que bueno, que la invitaron, where there is just a discourse marker, no real dislocate from either sentence. It's just a discourse marker. Even as Pires showed in a footnote, an imperative, dice que oye, que ha suspendido, right? That oye element there. And negation or the emphatic C dice que no se casa. Notice how what we have sandwiched now between Ks is basically negation, or it could even be an elided clause, but we don't really have a left dislocated phrase there, okay? And this is not really a problem, even though Echeverria claimed that it was a problem for this type of paratactic account that we have been pursuing. In reality, this is just a restart. It's a discursive restart. So, we don't really need a remnant of ellipses in CP1. We just intercalate one of these elements and then you restart again. That's totally fine with us with this type of analysis, okay? And this actually also answers an important question raised by De Monte and Fernandez Soriano, which is the fact that whenever you have the secondary complementizer, it is because you have a high one first, as you can see in the examples here, 39a, 39b. Crucially, C is out. Why? Because there is no high complementizer that will support this one. This is mysterious under monoclausality, monosentential analysis. Why would the realizing the head of topic be contingent on realizing the head of the high C or fourth, for instance? Under biclausality, what we are claiming here is that when you have the second case, because you actually have one before, dice que, you just delete the verb there, but you have the same creature over and over again. And in fact, Joao Costa mentioned at some point that when you have recomplementation, you have the same complementizer in all cases. And recomplementation is not even limited to 2 cases, as Escribano showed in 1991. You can have multiple of them, right? Dice que al final, que a la niña, que la van a llamar Noelia, okay? And even in English, right? I don't think that for the sake of your own well-being, that if you're in a bilingual classroom, that once you've completed the homework in one language, that you should have to do it all over again in the second one. For us, under parataxis, again, this is not really a problem at all. We just have CP1, CP2, and even, of course, CP3. You just have an amalgamation of sequences of root clauses there, okay? There are interesting data with, you know, interrogatives, both in Spanish and English, preguntó si a la fiesta si vais a ir, showing that sometimes you repeat a different complementizer, not necessarily, okay, you know, kind of severing this element from topic, okay, because C is clearly an interrogative complementizer. For us, this is not a problem. Why? Well, because you have whatever verb, whatever it selects, in this case, wonder and preguntar always select, inherently select for a plus Q complement. And then you have a copy of that, which is elided, pregunto, wonder. That's why you repeat the same complementizer again, as we can see in 45 and in the analysis under 46. And there is some interesting cases in Spanish with que si, that if, okay, which again must be repeated once more. Dijo que si a la fiesta, que si venían, okay? And actually Echeverría has recently done, you know, an experimental study on this, showing that this is the preferred version in many cases. For us, again, this is just a repetition of the same story, que si, whatever the internal structure of que si is a different story, but for us, we are basically doing the same thing. Dice que si, dice que si, okay? So restart. And I'll basically stop there. I'll just mention that selection is also not a problem for parataxis. Why? Well, because with verbs like lamentar, which are factives, and according to the Monte and Fernandez Soriano and other authors, these cannot take a recomplementized complement. Lamento que ese coche que no lo compres, according to the authors. Siento mucho que una película tan bonita que te la hayas perdido. For us, this is not a problem because such fragments, okay, me dijo que tu hija, are fine, but with lament, for instance, they are really out. ¿Quién ha ganado? Lamento que tu hija, que tu niña. Those are out. And that would be the prediction. And we would like to thank Olga Fernandez Soriano for bringing this to our attention. And then, you know, the last one I'll skip is just why you don't have the secondary complementizer with clitic right dislocation, which again follows from the account. So we believe that parataxis answers many of the questions posed by monosentential analysis, okay? And we believe that it makes some very welcome predictions and has also unveiled several properties of recomplementation that were previously unknown or unnoticed, such as, you know, the non-dependence of a clitic left dislocated element occurring in between complementizers. So thank you very much. I hope we have some time for questions.
Thank you, Julio. Yes, we have like 5 minutes for questions, and we have many people. Oh, gee, who was the first one? Probably Fernando.
Yep.
Okay.
Fernando?
So I have a question about your ellipsis analysis. So you're making a parallel with backwards ellipsis. And backwards ellipsis is like, you can either say like Bill doesn't, but Peter does admire his teacher. And you can say Bill doesn't admire his teacher, but Peter does. But I think in your cases, you can't. The only option is to delete the first verb, right? So how would you account for that? And related to that, you're kind of making a prediction that you could say something like, Juan a María y Pedro invitó a tu madre, which doesn't sound good to me, right? So how do you make sure that
you are too quick-minded for me? Sorry.
Okay.
It's a lot of regarding the first one. I think you can actually have cases where you start with que, which is reported. You speak Spanish, Laura, from your accent, I could tell.
Yes.
Okay. Where you have a quotative que, and then you actually repeat the second verb. So, ¿qué ha dicho? Que a tu madre dice que no la invitan. Because you start with que, then you have the dice repeated there. I didn't include them in the handout because it was cluttered enough. So I think in that sense, it's not the first question is not a big problem. I don't think. And then the second one, sorry, can you repeat it? Because I'm not sure I could follow.
Yeah, so I think your analysis might be predicting that in cases of, like, let's say gapping, I don't know what this would be called, right? But something like Juan a María y Pedro invitó a tu madre, which to me it sounds bad, right? No. But I think you're predicting that should be possible, right?
I'm not sure I understand that, and we are claiming that there's a very specific thing happening in our thing, and we're not making any claims about ellipsis more generally. We are just saying, you start, me dijo que Laura, que me preguntó, right? You're kind of restarting. So I see what you mean, but we're not making any claims about ellipsis being all over the place. We're just, I don't know if this makes sense, what I'm saying.
Yeah. So I guess, like, then my question is more general about, like, what licenses ellipsis in these cases, and how do you restrict ellipsis of the verb to the main clause? And I guess for the second clause you can get away with that, but for the main verb of the embedded verb of the main clause, I think it's not clear to me how you would restrict that to only those cases. But that might be a more general question.
Yeah, exactly. But you agree with me that you have those fragments, right? ¿Qué pasa? Aquí no han invitado. Dicen que a María, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you do have that ingredient independently in Spanish. ¿Qué te han comprado? Dicen que las flores. Dicen que las flores. And now the other one. ¿Qué ha pasado? Que blah, blah, blah. So dicen que las flores que las han comprado. So notice that we are making the claim that these two ingredients are independently available in Spanish. We're not saying this is a specific construct that is just for recomplementation.
Okay. Yeah.
And the reason is that when I started working on this, I had your same concerns, and then Odd had to explain to me really what he meant.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, I know we have other questions, so I ask people to either send the questions in the chat or maybe email, because we do have our schedule and we run out of time. So thank you, Julio. Nice presentation. And now we have Clara. Are you here? Yeah, and Valentina. Yes. So you are already host, right? Yeah, okay, good.
Can you see my slides?
Yeah. Yes,
good.
They're very nice. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you so much. So Clara and I today are going to talk about gestural focus marking. Basically, when you have a gesture which associates with focus constituents. However, before starting our presentation, we are aware that there are some languages in which the gesture we're talking about is considered to be a slur, so it's insulting. So if you do speak one of those languages, we sincerely apologize, because in the languages we're looking at is not at all insulting. So we apologize again. Okay. Okay. So the important thing before starting our talk today is that we need to lay down some I would say, theoretical assumptions, and even see why we're looking at gestures today and why we're looking at gesture in the context of information structure. In fact, I think that all of us would agree that quite recently there is a growing interest in gesture within a formal linguistic perspective. And this is mostly from a semantic and a pragmatic perspective. In fact, I would say that granted the very different analysis that there are, many semanticists would agree that the semantic content of gestures can be integrated into the meaning of spoken utterances. Of course, these analyses make very different claims, but the more general claim stays, okay? So one way to explain the semantic integration of gesture is to treat them as part of the grammar, okay? So if they do make a meaning, if they do contribute to the meaning, then one viable hypothesis is that gesture can be part of this semantic meaning, can be part of the semantic meaning of utterances because they appear in syntactic representations. And this is a claim, an old claim which has been made by originally Mélanie Joyteau and then has been recently revived by Saylor and Colasanti and my recent work. Okay. So now that we have this hypothesis, this comes from a very common observation, okay? So the common observation is that gestures are performed with the same articulators as sign languages, okay? So gestures are performed in the so-called visual gestural modality, right? And so if this is an observation that I think all of us can agree, and if we couple this observation together with the assumption of an inverted Y model that a lot of people in the room, I think, assume, then we believe that syntax is the only mediator between form and meaning, between PF and LF. Then we also agree that syntax should be a module of the grammar which is actually modality blind. Namely, in simple terms, syntax shouldn't care if the syntactic features are externalized at a PF interface as speech or as gesture, right? So both the auditory modality, okay, the modality of the speech, and the visual gestural modality, which is the modality of gesture and sign languages, should be not a mother of syntax. Syntax just shouldn't care. With all this in mind, which hopefully has provided some little background of even like why Clara and Valentina are looking at a gesture in a focus context, today we are focusing our attention on one specific gesture in the Italo-Romance variety, which is called Lancianese, okay? So the gesture is the one you see in the picture, is a co-speech gesture. So if you look at me, this is the gesture, okay? So it's not okay, but it's articulated in a specific way and is confirmed repetition. From the previous literature, this gesture, so ring, is reported to be a focalizing discourse marker in many Southern Italo-Romance varieties, especially the one spoken in the region in Campania, okay? And these previous claims are claims by Adam Candon in two of his works in 1995 and 2004. And so our claim on the basis of new experimental data from Lancianese, we do argue that Adam Candon was on the right track and that it seems that also in Lanciano, co-speech ring is a focus marker. Okay. What we're going to do today is to kind of giving a brief description of the broader project in which this research is situated. Then I'm going to provide some background on ring as a co-speech gesture. And then Clara is going to present the design of our experiment and some very preliminary results that have not been statistically analyzed, so they're merely suggestive at this point, but we wanted really to try to discuss them in this venue, which is very heterogeneous. So we would really love your feedback on that, okay? So let's start with talking about very Gestogram stands for Gestural Grammar, investigating gestures in southern Italy, and is based at Trinity College Dublin. The main aim, in very simple terms, is that the project aims to study a grammar of gesture, right? So we try to see if and how gesture can make a grammatical contribution. So they can be treated as linguistic objects that can be analyzed at different levels of the grammar, not necessarily just semantically, but also prosodically, syntactically, phonologically, and so on, okay? In doing so, we clearly use as empirical base the so-called gesture-heavy languages, which are spoken in Italy, and we do refer to them as Italo-Romance as opposed to Italian, because the languages that we're really looking at are different varieties of Italiano regionale or regional Italian, which is basically what the majority of Italians speak, and the local languages which are spoken at the level of the city or at the level of the town, which are called dialetti, but they're actually not dialects in the strict sense, but are sister languages of French, Spanish, Catalan, and this is the empirical base for today's talk. So Lancianese is one of those varieties spoken in a town, in a little city. Okay, now that we know a little bit more about gestogram and about what gestogram does, I'm going to talk about a little bit about the background. So what we know about Ring, what we knew about Ring before deciding to investigate it. Okay, so Ring is a co-speech gesture. It's obligatorily co-speech. You need to articulate it together with speech, cannot be a pro-speech gesture. And I think the cool thing about gesture that I don't have to describe it, I'm just going to perform it for you. So this is the gesture, okay? And what is cool is that the palm is facing down, and it seems that the fingers are extended, the tip of the index and the thumb are together, they form an ovular shape, and the movement is sharp and goes downward like this, okay? This was firstly described by the Iorio in 1832 for Neapolitan, so we assume it's pretty old. What we know about Ring is that Ring is a focus marker, as I said, is obligatorily co-speech, and to put it in Kendon's work, it marks prominence and the focality of a constituent. So when it's accompanied with speech, what it accompanies with is the focalized constituent. And this is a little example that we took from Kendon, and this is a contrastive focus. The context is the one in which a speaker and the addressee are looking at a poster, and the speaker thinks that the telephone number reported on the poster is the wrong one, okay? Because somebody else giving previously a different telephone number, okay? Which he considers to be the correct one. And so while both the speaker and the addressee are in front of this poster, the speaker says to the addressee, "A me mi ha dato 23, 24, 16. Okay, so you can see that the first part, a me mi ha dato, okay, is without the gesture, and then the gesture starts at 23, 24, 16, which is 23, 24, 16. Okay, and so notice that the underlining means in these and the following examples, the constituent that is associated with the gesture is temporarily aligned with the gesture. Okay, now that I gave you this brief background, Clara is going to explain something about the design of our experiment and also some results. Clara?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So the experiment was an hybrid experiment. So we can move on to the next slide. Okay. So the idea was to try to investigate whether native speakers had intuitions about the gesture and whether they indeed thought it was a focalizing element. So we were testing Kendon's hypothesis, but with experimental data. Okay, next slide. So as we said, we're using this variety of Italo-Romance that is called Lancianese. It's spoken in Abruzzo, and it's a small town. And it's a variety of Italo-Romance that is so-called Upper Southern Italo-Romance. So it's part of the same language family as Neapolitan. The fieldwork methodology that we used were already used by Valentina to collect data on other gestures. And basically, it's an online questionnaire that speakers are requested to do. But the nice thing is that it's kind of hybrid, because I was there with the native speakers to support them with any technical difficulties or with any problems that they had with the design. And so it was already used, as I said, for the other famous Italian gesture, the mano borsa one. So the experiment was made to investigate ring with different kind of focalized constituents. So we had broad focus, VP focus, narrow foci on various DPs. We had dislocated elements and to the high left periphery and not dislocated element. We had different 23 different test items plus 2 fillers. This experiment was administered to 20 native speakers of Lancianese, and it was made part of 2 parts, a binary choice task, which was the first part, and then exactability judgment tasks. So in the first, the first part was a binary choice task, and what we did to make the environment as familiar as possible to the speaker is having a little context in which we describe the situation, and then there was a recorded audio. In audio question in which we asked a question, and then we had 2 different videos, one with the gesture and one without the gesture. The speaker were asked to say which one they preferred. So all of these were pre-recorded audios and videos by a native speaker. And the native speakers, the consultants were asked to judge which one they preferred. We were assuming that both of the 2 sentences were grammatical, because obviously we can have a sentence without gesture and it would still be grammatical, but we were trying to investigate which one the speakers preferred. Okay, so now let's see an example. So we had a contest like in 2. Tonino knows that Rocco bought a new car. When he bumps into Rocco's dad at the market, he asks him. And then the question was in Lancianese, Rocco s'ha accattato un Audi? So did Rocco buy an Audi? And Rocco's dad replies, and then in this case, this would be a video recording. So the first answer is without a gesture, so it would be, no, una BMW s'ha accattato Rocco. While in C, we had the gesture. So it was, no, una BMW s'ha accattato Rocco. And the answer would be, no, Rocco has bought a BMW with the contrastive focus that has moved to the high left periphery. And so as you can see here,
5 minutes.
Thank you. As you can see here, 90% of the speakers preferred the sentence with the gesture. I must say these are preliminary results. We didn't do the whole of the statistics, so bear in mind that these are the means, but it's a quite nice result. Okay, and these are the more general results for all of the sentences. So the first one, it's very low. Probably there was something wrong with the context. All the other focus contexts, you can see that the majority of speakers prefer the sentence with the gesture, with the ring gesture. So what these results show is that there are the great majority of focus types are compatible with the ring gesture, and actually that the preferred sentences are those where the ring occurs. Okay. The second part was instead acceptability judgment ratings. So the context and the sentences were the same, but this time we had 5 different videos in which the gesture was aligned at different places in the sentence, or it preceded or it followed. We will see that in more detail afterwards. And we asked speakers to judge the naturalness of these sentences in a Likert scale from 0 to 10. Okay, so again, we have the same context. It's a contrastive focus context. So Tonino is asking about Rocco's, whether he has bought a car or not. And we have 5 different options. So the first one, the gesture precedes the sentence and it's not aligned with the sentence. So it would be, no, una BMW s'accattato rock, with completely misalignment. The second one, the gesture is at the end. No, una BMW s'accattato rock, with gesture at the end. The third one, D, is the gesture is aligned with the spoken part, but it's not aligned with the focus. It's aligned with the given part. So it would be, no, una BMW s'accattato rock, which we expect to be weird. And then we have E, in which the gesture starts on the focalized element and then continues. So, no, una BMW s'accattato rock. And finally, we have F, which we have, no, una BMW s'accattato rock. The gesture is just on the focalized element. As you can see from the results, the sentence that the majority of speakers prefer is F. It has very high acceptability judgment. They also speakers accept E, in which we have a lower the focus continues, the gesture continues after the focus, but all the others are quite, were judged very low. And this is showing that the people want the alignment of the gesture with the focused part. Okay, we also add the same context, but with the focus not in the high left periphery. And so you can argue that it's lower. And the question were the same. So either we add the gesture at the beginning or after the sentence, as in C, or misaligned, as in D. And then we add the alignment, the whole sentence, and then F with just the focalized element. And so as you can see, the speakers again preferred the sentence in which the gesture is aligned with the focused element. Okay, so what this is showing us is that participants rejected items in the articulation of ring. So they reject elements in which the gesture completely follows or completely precedes the spoken utterance. They also reject cases in which the gesture is misaligned with the spoken utterance. On the other hand, they accepted articulation of ring when it is aligned with the focalized element and when it can continue until the end of the sentence. And this holds for all the focus types that we tested. Okay, so what we see here is that the temporal alignment of ring reflects its C-command or scope domain. And this is already being shown by Valentina in previous work on mano borsa as a question particle, but also previous work by Everett et al. On gesture and focus markers there. And so what we're arguing is that ring behaves similarly to well-known focus particle in spoken languages. Spoken and sign modality. So for instance, Ba in Lele, which is a Bantu language. And so rings seems to be a focus marker, but in the gestural modality. So it's a gestural focus marker. Okay, and so now some conclusions. The distribution of these co-speech gesture seems to constitute evidence that indeed gestures are syntactically integrated. And what we're arguing is that this non-iconic gesture is grammaticalized. And what we mean by this is that it is part of the lexicon of many Ithano-Romance languages, but it's not part of the spoken lexicon, it's part of the gestural lexicon. And so from a general theoretical perspective, these results, which are preliminary, but still they provide some evidence that syntax is modality blind. And what we mean by this is that syntax cannot see the difference between how something is externalized. And basically there is the gestural versus spoken distinction arises at PF. These are our references, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you. And we are open for questions. Cilene?
Nice work. Super linguistics work, right? Integrated to the super linguistics project. I have a couple of comments and a question. The first one, did you control for eyebrows raising in the experiment?
No, we didn't. But one nice thing is that our videos, the speakers were not shown the head of the speaker, and so in the videos, and so in this way, we kind of controlled for any visual expression that.
Okay, so you did control because they didn't see it, so it
yeah. In that sense,
eyebrows
yes.
raising.
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah. So another question is, I don't think that this gesture needs to be a call speech gesture. Look, if I do like this, if you see me in this video doing this, you know that you can say like, all right, so she has a proposition in her mind and somehow she's emphasizing something, but that's just fine, I guess. So it's just the idea that it works, it works over proposition. I think that's the point, but it doesn't need to be a call speech. Now, a question is, do you think we can analyze your results as a code blending type of language, a bimodality language that we see, for example, in CODA, speakers of sign language and oral languages? Do you think you can think of this in this way, but thinking of gestures as a more primitive grammar? So what we see here is two grammars in place, one of them being more primitive and they being, simultaneously produced.
So if I understand it correctly, you think that there would be two utterances going at the same time, one from one grammar.
Yeah. Like they do.
I think this has been proposed, right, from previous people. Yeah. That's, I wouldn't know how to, how would so if you're taking into consideration them as two different utterances, how can you see interesting patterns of alignment that it's unclear? Because it means that one grammar is able to look in the grammar, respectively. So it's an interesting idea, Cilene, but I don't know what the theoretical consequences of that would be.
No, that is interesting because you have to think that one of the grammars, so it's so primitive that it doesn't really have a whole, it's not that you have a whole structure there that's not being produced. It's just that part can be produced and you produce with the gesture. And it
would be a simpler grammar.
Exactly. Yeah. It's just an idea for what is a grammar, right? That's the whole super linguistic thing. What is the grammar? And maybe gesture has a grammar that we can, put on the top of another grammar, a more complex grammar, language grammar.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's an open question, right?
That's right. Yeah.
I think that all the literature which talks about simultaneity in sign languages, that it's an open question, right? What happens there when you have layers of grammatical elements one on another? Yeah. And then, of course, when you move your body, you dance and so on, and then the situation gets really big. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
That's really.
I think we have time for one more question. It's going to be Mara, and I'm sorry because quick one. Thank you.
Thank you. So it was really interesting, and I just, talking about layers. My question is, did you control prosody? I ask you just because thinking of in fact gestures to be focus markers, then it can be possible to prove that they are actually part of the grammar, to see if there is a sort of economy. So that, because I can tell you, for instance, also in Italian, one thing that is very common, at least in central varieties like mine, is the use of the complementizer as a question mark for yes/no questions. That is to say, instead of saying something like vai al mare, so are you going to the seaside? And you can say che vai al mare, with the che at the beginning. And I've done studies on that, and it's very interesting to see that when you have a yes/no question, the typical intonation is a raising tone, vai al mare, while when you have the initial che, then you have exactly the intonation of a normal or a broad focus sentence, so a downgrading intonation. So che va al mare. In this way, we can think of an economy of different levels of grammar, so that when you have a morphological mark that tells you, okay, this is a yes/no question, then intonation doesn't have to do the job any longer, because to have a raising intonation, of course, it's a difficulty. I mean, it's a weight for the grammar. Of course, we prefer to go downgrading at the end of the sentence. That is normal for broad focus sentences. So it would be very nice. I was thinking when I was looking at the experiment, the first one, when you have the preference to with or without the focus marker, then to see the recording and to see, I mean, a person using that, what happens when you have it or you don't have it.
Yeah, I think that's a good question, in the sense that we haven't really looked at prosodically focused, like the interaction with focus marked by a prosody. But it seems that at least the intuition is that when you do have mismatches, like, because Italo-Romance is quite particular with prosody, so the focus is not always prosodically marked. It can be, but it's not. It's a question of economy, maybe. I don't have an answer for that, but we absolutely haven't tested the prosody, and that's the second part. And I think this goes back to what Cilene was saying about the eyebrows, because we want to see if we introduce the whole picture, what happens. So if we have a question without the gesture, but with the brow raising or furrowing, and then we use a different prosody, because overall, I think that the idea that prosody makes a semantic meaning is within the idea of simultaneity more generally. So gesture, prosody, and speech. So yeah, that's definitely one thing that we're going to look at. Thanks, Amelia.
Thank you. We have other questions, but again, we run out of time. So I ask people to send the questions via the chat or via email. And now we have 15 minutes break, but the idea is that we should discuss the poster, the first poster, the poster by, let me open here because I don't remember. I think it is the poster by, it's the poster by Romina and Vittoria. So the idea is that I hope they are here. Yes, they are. So I don't know exactly how this is going to work. I never did this of the poster in.
Roberta, if you don't have any questions, we could do the following. Romina and Vittoria could, we can give them 5 minutes to briefly present it to us, to summarize it for us, and then we open the floor for questions. Are you okay with that, Romina? Victoria, I don't see Victoria here. Yeah?
Yeah, okay. Victoria, do you have the slides there? We need to share.
Yeah, who is the host now? I think it's you, Roberta, or Isabella. I am not. Let me see if I'm the host. If I am, I will make sure. No, I'm not the host right now. I think you are.
So I should make Victoria the.
Yes, the co-host.
I can't.
Okay, so it has to be Isabella, and let me see if I find Isabella here.
She's there.
Isa?
Already done.
Perfect. Okay, Victoria, you can go ahead.
I will be presenting. First, I'm gonna check because we didn't prepare the slides.
Do you have the slides?
Yes, I'm looking for them. First, we can maybe talk about the proposal while I'm looking for them.
Okay. Well, and our proposal is that Sharon form, we are studying Sharon form imperfective constructions, just like star plus Sharon and others with motion auxiliary like go, ir, venir, come, or andar, walk plus Sharon. And we propose that the Sharon form always give rise to an imperfective meaning. Understanding imperfective meaning, like Van Genhoven understand imperfectivity, which is a pluractional structure. It creates a durative temporal structure. And if you want, Victoria, I can looking for the slides.
Maybe I can make my question, because just to while you look for the slides, because I don't think we have much time.
Okay. Well, we propose that the Sharon form is an imperfective operator, and that the meaning of the different kind of periphrases are composed in a compositional way. That means the Sharon form is an imperfective operator that creates a durative temporal structure. It takes an event and returns durative temporal structure. And then the auxiliaries, which are semi-grammaticalized elements, give rise to the values of that imperfectivity. For example, ir plus Sharon give rise to cannot combine with activities. It needs to combine with achievements, because it's when it is a full lexical, and it is a degree achievement. So when it's semi-grammaticalized, and with this an auxiliary which is semi-grammaticalized, and it imposes some conditions to the structure created by the Sharon form. So, for example, Juan fue Juan va leyendo la tesis, Juan va leyendo un libro, Juan fue leyendo un libro, give rise to an incremental situation. And the sharing for and the ir, go, and auxiliary give rise to it's an operator which increase, which operates by increasing. Victoria, do you want to talk about this?
Yes, it's an operator that produces an incremental relation between the event or the times of events when we have the derivative event that the gerund produces, and makes a relation between an order scale in the same way that gradual adjectives work. So it produces a relation between the event and a scale, where with an order, with a temporal sequence, it produces an order scale of values, different values. For example, in that case, could be more extent of the book, or sometimes less, depending on the verb. And that would be with ir. With another verb as andar, the mechanism is different. Do you want to talk about that?
Yes, in that case, the auxiliary, which is not a degree achievement, but it's an activity, imposed some restrictions, like it cannot combine with achievements and understanding achievements without any kind of shift, and so coercion. So it needs structures that contains some hiatus or some phases, like activities, which needs minimal parts as events with minimal parts, like phases. That's our proposal, and it's different, or it's different in the way the literature have studied them, and because we think that the sharing form is present in all these sharing constructions, sharing peripheral constructions, and so that meaning would be in every situation. There are some structures with sharing form that don't have this aspectual meaning. And in the final part of the poster we did, and you can see, I don't know where is it uploaded, but you can see it there. And in the final part, we discuss how to face the problem that there are some constructions where sharing form does not give rise to aspectual meaning, but seems to give rise to temporal meaning. That's constructions are non-periphrastic constructions, just like escribiendo la tesis en un día, Ana pudo llegar con los tiempos. By writing in the thesis in one day, Ana could manage it. And so this sharing form is not aspectual. It does not give rise to aspectual meaning. And in the final part of the poster, we discuss this issue. So if you want to look at the poster, I don't know if we have time here.
I don't think so, but I have just a question. Maybe we can try to see this, because if I understood you with andar, I'm gonna talk about Portuguese because I don't have intuition about Spanish. But with andar, it's not really progressive that we have there. If I say eu ando lendo, esse livro, or eu ando saindo, it doesn't mean that the event itself is in progress, which is different from when I have something like, I am reading a book, the event itself is in progress. But if I say, eu ando saindo, or eu ando lendo, it doesn't mean that the event is going on, but it has the meaning of repetition of that event, a recent habit or recent repetition of that event. So for me, at least, maybe when you talk about meaning of progressive, you are putting together two different things. One is the event that is going on, that's open, that is going on. And another one is, I have a period of time, and in that period of time, there is repetition of of different events of the same kind, let's say like this.
Yes, that's the meaning we also have for andar. And the Sharon form gives rise to that durative structure, but then andar specifies or restricts that by imposing, because it's an operator, imposing that this structure, this durative temporal structure, have little phases or hiatus. Because Juan or Ana anduvo viajando o anda viajando mucho, Ana traveling a lot, means something like there are a lot, or there are an indefinite events of traveling realized by Ana. So yes, that's the meaning we also.
Yeah, I just want to highlight that progressive there is not really what is going on. So it's not an event that's going on in that case.
Right.
Okay, so maybe we already run out of time, Cilene, but if you want to make one question, open your microphone.
I'm sorry, I just want to, if you look at what's the contribution of the gerund form in this case? Well, this is really a bit hard because maybe we don't have a gerund form that walks along. But if you look at a language like English that you do, so it's probably interesting to look at these languages to see what's the what's the properties of gerunds that allows you to do this kind of stuff, or that it allows you to use them in this kind of structure, right? So in English, the fact that you can have gerund forms like INGs, him watching the movie all day long is horrible. So what kind of syntax we have there that resembles what you are doing right here? What kind of interpretation? What kind of semantics you have there?
Yes, we were searching this issue in Spanish, so we were looking for every sentence where gerund form expressed. But yes, it would be nice to compare with another kind of languages. Yeah. I know that in English gerund form function really different that's from Spanish. But well, our work is in gerund form in Spanish, perhaps in other Romance languages also. Yes.
Yeah, so in English, I'm going out with this guy. But you can say Mary's going out with this guy is terrible. So what's in the gerund that gives you this readings? If you have something already, Mary's going out with this guy, some sort of, I don't know.
So I think that, thank you girls, thank you for the presentation, and we should go to our next talk, right? Otherwise we get too late. And this is by Adriana Belacci, and Cilene is going to take care.
My hand, okay. So Hello, can you hear us well, Professor?
I can hear you. Maybe I'll try to share my screen.
Thank you. Let me just introduce you, and then, is she a co-host yet already? Yeah, right? Yeah, so I'll introduce you, and meanwhile, if you wish, you can share your screen. So Professor Adriana Belacci from University of Siena. It's a great honor to introduce Professor Belacci for two reasons. First, because she's a woman in science. Second, because she's a woman who does inspiring science. And her work at the end of the 80s on argument structure, especially on side verbs and accusatives, were very important for us to drive us to the conclusion that GB needed revision, and that culminated at the end of the Nimelis program. Her recent work in collaboration with Professor Rizzi on cartography syntax provide us with an additional tool to investigate how rich syntax structure is. So Professor Adriana Belacci, many thanks for being with us today, for having accepted our invitation, and please, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. And so let me start my presentation by making some comments on the kind of perspective that I decided to give, to meet the topic of this conference on Romance, languages and contribution to linguistic theory. And the perspective I decided to take is the perspective from language acquisition. And the idea is that, well, let's see if I can, yes, that, so why so? Well, because I think that many other as well, I believe that work on acquisition over the years, over many years actually, has acquired a kind of special status. So the special of a kind of special window on questions of theoretical relevance. So for instance, something that I will touch upon later, it has to be very relevant for the work on locality and the featural approach to relativized minimality. And this is just one among several examples. So the developing system, we can see it as a kind of magnifier of properties that may remain unnoticed if we only look at the adult, fully developed grammar. And this is what I find exciting on the work on acquisition. So in a way, this study of development contributes in a peculiar way to comparative syntax. So it offers a special type of comparison. So on the other hand, there is a kind of dialogue. So theoretical hypotheses contribute to clarify aspects of development that otherwise look mysterious or very chaotic, okay? So there is this, as I said, fruitful dialogue, which is established between theory and development. And in particular, I'm going to illustrate some of this dialogue from the perspective of the theoretical work in syntactic cartographies and the tools that it may offer in interpreting stages and in acquisition. And I underscore this, especially unexpected ones. Okay, so this talk, the point of departure of this talk will be the quick illustration of the insights of the growing trees approach that we developed recently in work with Luigi Rizzi and Amma Friedman, and its relation with the truncation process that's been debated a lot in the 90s and early 2000s. I'll come back to that. So then the talk will take two paths. First, I will consider aspects of, as I say, the cartography of types of clausal incompleteness. We'll see that different stages of development allow for different access to reduced structures. And in particular, there is a major difference between what the way children may reduce and what adults can do. And one take-home message that I want to talk about much here, but I want to highlight immediately is that the results we are going to see indicate that smaller is not necessarily always easier, which I kind of like. And so we are going to see the case of reduction from the perspective of truncated clauses on one respect and reduced relative clauses in another respect in Italian. Then the second so the talk is divided in two parts, if you want. So the second kind of path that we're going to take is concerns a stage in which the say syntactic tree in the growing tree perspective is fully developed, is fully grown, but then we see a kind of creative use of the structure, in particular of the left periphery, by children, and we are going to concentrate on so-called atopics in the production and comprehension of Italian-speaking children, and this will allow us for cross-linguistic comparison throughout Romance in the domain of a-marking of object topics, which is a grammatical option that Italian-speaking children we discovered exploit a lot under particular conditions. So I will then design a kind of trajectory of a-marking in the high and low topic position, and then we'll make some speculation. This will give us the opportunity to also give some speculations on the nature of preposition a compared to preposition to in English. So that's the program. Okay, so this is the basic map of the left periphery that has been developed over work over several years and several languages. So now in the growing trees work with, as I said, Nama Friedman and Luigi Rizzi, we analyzed the spontaneous production of a big corpus of Hebrew-speaking children, and this corpus looked very chaotic, but then with the map of the closed structure in these terms, we gave him a kind of rational interpretation of this apparent chaos and see that indeed different stages of the development of the tree can account for children's behavior. And in particular, we identified 3 stages of the growth of the syntactic tree, and in particular, in the first stage, so this one, there are no signs of left peripheral constructions. There are only simple declaratives present at this stage. In stage 2, WH questions of various kinds and yes/no questions are present, and also some preposed adverbs, though that are assumed to target mode in the cartographic work. And then in stage 3, relative clauses, topicalizations, why questions, and sentence embedding start appearing. Okay, so now I want to, of course, this would be a different talk on growing trees, but so given this highlight, this basic idea, I want to highlight the one property of this type of account, namely its implicational kind of nature. Namely, according to this approach, presence of a construction stage, say of stage 2, implies presence of stage 1, and presence of stage 3 implies presence of stage 2 and stage 1. Okay, so there is this kind of implication. So this was our point of departure. Now, as I said, there is a stage that has been debated a lot over the 90s, last century, where children are known to express themselves through, sometimes, through impoverished, say, clauses, or impoverished clauses that are impoverished with respect to the expression of finite features, so this is the stage referred to as the root infinitive or optional infinitive. So in order to express a root descriptive clause, they may use an infinitive like in French. So this is a stage that can be described, it has been described as one in which there is a somewhat impoverished sentence structure, which can be consistently properly mastered by young children, in contrast with structures that express a fully fledged functional structure. So, however, the impoverished structure is never found in embedded context, nor in context in which there is a richer, there is clear evidence of a richer, of a higher structure, say. So, in particular, for instance, of expressions that include the CP layer, say a WH question, as in the following example. So children in the root infinitive stage do have access to complete functional structure of the clause. It's just that they may not use it always in root declarative contexts. And this stage correlates with the so-called child null subject stage, which is a stage in which, say, the specifier of the root, say the edge of the clause, may remain unpronounced. Okay, so say spec TP. So the root infinitive stage may then be characterized, and it has been characterized as resulting from a truncation operation available to the developing child following Ritz's proposals and similar proposals in the domain of aphasia made about the same time by Friedman, who referred to it as the pruning hypothesis. The hypothesis is, the idea is that the truncation option is to some extent favored in early stages, as it allows for an overall less complex computation. So you use a smaller portion of structures, and this facilitates, say, computational complexity. Interestingly, in accord with continuity assumptions, comparable truncated structures are available, in particular constructions in adult grammars in different languages, and this is the case, for instance, of the topic drop phenomenon in German type languages, so that in this way, truncation constitutes a possible parametric option that young children exploit during their development. The idea is that this is favored by reasons of complexity. So in this respect, we do comparative syntax by doing acquisition, as I was mentioning at the beginning. In a cartographic CP, in principle, truncation can obtain at different levels of the CP. And for instance, the idea is that the topic drop phenomenon I mentioned, where the specifier of the root remains unpronounced, is the consequence of truncating the structure, say, at the level of top P. Okay, cleft sentences may also be another case, but I won't discuss them here now. Okay, so growing tree and truncation, so define different stages. So the latter, truncation, applies on an already fully grown syntactic tree to allow for a more parsimonious computation. So that's the idea for the developing system. So truncation is an operation that takes place on a completely grown syntactic tree. Okay, and we saw that children in the root infinitive stage can have WH questions, for instance. So let's now see the logic of truncation in the grown tree then. The idea is that the structure can be truncated at the level of CP or at the level of TP. And in the first case, it yields a TP. In the other case, it will lead to a VP, or the functional portion of the relevant functional portion. The point is that you cannot truncate, say, TP without also truncating CP. And this idea gives, as this tree doesn't hold together anymore, okay? So in this respect, the logic of truncation and the logic of growing trees is very similar, because there is this implicational flavor in both, okay? Now we move to something else, and we keep this in mind though. There has been a rich array of experimental findings over the last 15 years or so on A-bar dependencies, in particular, objective-bar dependencies, in particular, for instance, relative clauses. And this work has confirmed that children can master complex structures, for instance, relative clauses from relatively early on, age 3.5, has confirmed that subject relatives are mastered better and earlier than object relative clauses. And this is a very classical finding from a very classical literature, has, however, unveiled the fact that not all object relatives are hard for children. And this finding also holds for impairment. The discovery is that the object dependency, a-bar dependencies that are hard, say the object relatives that are hard, are those that manifest a situation of featural intervention that we can phrase according to the featural relativized minimality grammatical principle, so that these are indeed the hardest structures, and children are not able to deal with these structures until quite late, say age 8 or 9. So in the main insight is that the hard structures are those in which we have, this the case of object relatives, a lexical head, say the lion, and the lexical intervening subject. So in terms of feature relativized minimality, the dependency between the merge position and the target position cannot be created. And the idea is that the presence of the lexical subject and the lexical head creates a situation in which a feature inclusion of the intervener within the target is created, and such inclusion is not easily mastered by children. I mean, it can be handled by children until late, okay? So that's a very quick, long story made very short, okay? So, results from elicited production experiments in Italian have shown that both adults and children, as a matter of fact, tend not to produce the elicited object relative, the hard one, the one that manifests the inclusion configuration, but they do so in different ways, okay? So both adults and children, but they do so in different ways. Now, what happens is that only adults produce incomplete reduced structures. We might say, well, complete in some sense, but reduced structures. And specifically, they overwhelmingly reacted to several elicitation experiments with the production of reduced relative clauses in the passive. So instead, structures like questo è l'elefante bagnato dal leone, instead of saying questo è l'elefante che il leone bagna. That would be an active object relatives with a lexical head and an intervening subject. Okay, reduced relative clauses, however, are virtually absent in children's reaction to the very, very same elicitation experiment. So I use the term poor, namely passive object relatives, to refer to a relative clause in the passive when we try to elicit an active object relative, okay? And this shows that adults this come from a series of experiments we ran years ago, that adults tend to produce pores. So as I say, but the vast majority of these pores, so these passive object relatives, are reduced relative clauses of the type I've illustrated earlier. Instead, children don't use reduced relative clauses. They use other structures. It would be very interesting to discuss that, but I won't discuss that here. The comparison here that I want to make is between overwhelming presence of reduced relative clauses in adults and absence of the reduced relative clauses in children. So there are new questions that this data raise. And in particular, there are two complementary questions, different comparisons, as I said, but now I concentrate in one. So the relevant question from the angle of clausal reduction that arises, in particular, in light of the insight that come from the root infinitive stage and the truncation analysis that we reviewed at the beginning. The question here is, what makes the reduction implemented in passive past participial reduced relative clauses hard for children and different from the reduction through truncation that younger children often select in early development, as we said. Okay, so that's the question that this result raise. Now, some hypotheses, very rough hypotheses on the structure of the reduced relative clauses. So suppose that we have, so it's a relative clause, so we have the forced layer, but then I assume that the left periphery is very reduced. Let's make the assumption that it only contains the forced layer. It doesn't contain, in particular, the fin head, which as a way to express the non-finite nature of these clauses, but also the TP layer is very reduced. And to be concrete, I just assume that it is it contains the low part of the functional structure, maybe let's say in a spectral phrase and the VP. Okay, and presumably other participial clauses can, like absolute clauses, may be amenable to a similar configuration, but I won't discuss that here. Now, consider for a moment the main steps in the derivation of passive object relatives. So there is a passivization step. I assume a derivation through smuggling, and then the raising, I'm assuming a raising analysis of relative clauses, the raising of the relative head, okay? Now let's have a look at these same steps in the reduced relative clause. Here we have the passive past participle that is attracted by component of the passive voice, say a la Collins by. And this is the smuggling step. And then we have the raising of the relative head, okay? So that's the idea. So what happens in development then? Well, let's make some hypotheses, and here the hypothesis I want to submit, as I say here, the outline of a proposal may be that the late appearance of passive part participial relative clauses in the developmental data that we have discussed, presented, can be interpreted as a difficulty in computing a non-canonically grown sentence structure. So the one when you have the high layer and the reduced TP. So ultimately, you have a configuration that manifests a non-canonical selection among the different heads and among the different components of the closed structure. The tree reaches the highest force layer, but does not contain lower portions of the left periphery, nor of the TP area. That's the hypothesis we have been making. Okay, so in a way, this type of structure yields precisely a configuration which is in conflict with both growing tree and truncation, as past participial relative clauses are subordinate clauses that imply the CP level up to force to host the relative head, and then should have a fully fledged tree below that. Okay, so in a way, if you pass me this image, the structure of the reduced relative clause closely resembles the structure that cannot really be handled by young children, that it's not derivable through truncation nor growing trees. Okay, so that's the proposal, that's the idea, and this allows us to move to the second aspect I want to focus our attention on, namely, maybe children are not able to reduce, to reinterpret the tree in the way that is needed, as in the case of reduced relative clauses. However, when the tree is fully grown for them, they are very good in exploiting a fully fledged closed structure. And in particular, we're going to see that they can even make a creative use of the left periphery in young ages. As I say here, in particular conditions, and the hypothesis we're going to see is that, again, these particular conditions are to be recognized in the pressure of complexity of the computation. So the phenomenon we're going to see and discuss together is the robust presence of atopics in children's elicited production of clitic left dislocation. And this, as I said at the beginning, will show us a central role played by the comparison across romance. So first of all, how do we elicit the clitic left dislocation? So we had couple of experiments with joint work with Claudia Manetti years ago. In particular, so you ask a question on the patient, on the object. So what happens to my friend, the cat? This is a one topic condition and two topic condition. You have two topics. So what happens to my friends, the dog and the bear? Notice that in the second condition, where you have a kind of contrasting topic situation, in the answer, we expect the topic to be overtly expressed. So, for instance, here, il cane, il gatto lo bagna, l'orso, il coniglio lo veste. Okay? And indeed, the left peripheral object topics were more frequently overtly expressed precisely in this condition, okay? In the first condition, what happens to my friend the cat, you just use a pronoun. You don't need to overtly express the topic. And indeed, as this graph shows us, we call pronoun the structure with no overt realization of the topic, and clitic left dislocation, the one that has the overt realization of the topic. Indeed, in the one patient condition, children did not produce clitic left dislocations, whereas they did when they had two topic conditions. So this is a kind of parenthesis, but it's important because it shows us that children are, the young children, these are between 3 and 4 years of age, and 3, 4, and 4, 5, okay, the age on which we concentrate. So young children are discourse appropriate. And they make this distinction, so they produce the topic when it needs to be produced, okay? And that's already nice. However, and here comes the point, this topic is the unexpected part of the result, because the result have shown that these young children made a wide use of a marking, as I call it here, namely they mark with preposition the left dislocated object. So they tended to produce clitic left dislocations as this one, al coccodrillo, l'elefante lo lava, in Italian, instead of 1b, this one, il coccodrillo, l'elefante lo lava. And in standard Italian, this is what we would have expected. At least this is what we expected, considering ourselves speakers of standard Italian, particularly on a variety of Italian that would not do the marking. So I'll come back to that. Now, this phenomenon is not just that, let me go back here, that this happens sometimes. But if we look at all clitic left dislocations produced, namely those constructions in which the topic, the preposed topic was overtly expressed, they were unmarked, so they were atopics, say in 88% of the cases. So overwhelmingly, only 12% of the cases were the simple topic, as we call it, namely the object preposed with no a. Okay, which is what we had expected. Now, notice from the beginning, that the subject was lexical and overt in all cases, because there were two situations. So, in order to be fully informative, the subject had to be expressed, and it was known, so it was typically preverbal as well. Come back to that. But now, so that's a robust phenomenon. Italian is a multiple topic language, and indeed the order can be atopic subject or subject atopic, but there was no difference in in the data. So we put the results together. So this means that sometimes children said things like all'orso il coniglio lo sta vestendo, or il coniglio all'orso lo veste in 88. So this is the 88% of the productions, and only 12% of simple topic, il coniglio, l'orso lo veste, or with the other order. Okay. Well, new questions raised by the results. So that's the dialogue between the theory and development I was referring to at the beginning. So why, I mean, the big question is why so many atopics? Now, this is a big question, so let's scorporate it in several sub-questions, or split maybe. So first question to ask is, but maybe the children we tested speak a differential object marking language. So they speak Italian, but in fact they're speaking, say, Spanish, although that's the question. Namely, they are speaking a language in which the object is marked with preposition a, and so I is simply carried along when the topic is proposed. So nothing else to say. But if we can show that that's not the case, or if we detect that this is in fact not the case, then the question becomes, how can we characterize the use of this marker? And again, we can split in different sub-questions. Is this marker frequent with object topics in standard Italian? Is this marker found in other languages? Do children use this marker for the topic randomly? Or can we find some coherent pattern? So some principled reasons that maybe leads them to this choice. And then maybe we want to know even also if children understand a topic, so want to have comprehension results as well. Okay, so now let's leave for the trip on the different questions. So, well, the atopic is not a dumb effect. So it's not a consequence of the fact that these children are speaking a variety of Italian that has differential object marking, which is the case in several varieties, in particular of southern of southern Italian. So all these children speak a non-southern central Tuscan variety of Italian, which is not a differential object marking language. Now, although, however, they say things like il coniglio al pinguino lo tocca, okay? How can we be so sure that they are actually really not speaking a differential object marking language? Well, sometimes in their productions, children answer with SVO sentences, okay? So instead of producing a critical left dislocation, in that respect, they were less discourse appropriate, if you want, but they would just answer with a descriptive sentence. And now nicely, in the two topic condition, they had to answer with two sentences because there were two events to be need to be described. But so when it happened a number of times that they produce a critical left dislocation, and the other sentence was just a declarative SVO. So this gave us the opportunity to check precisely, oh, maybe they are marked objects, period. Okay, so that's why the left dislocated is an object is an atopic. But interestingly, we have what I like to refer to as a kind of experiment in nature, because we had answers like the following. So what happens to my friend, the penguin and the cow? Answer, la giraffa sta leccando la mucca, so no A marking on the object, e il coniglio al pinguino lo sta grattando. Okay, so, and this was always the case. We had 0 A on the object in SVO sentences. So we think that we can conclude that the A marking of the topic is not an effect of differential object marking, but it's rather a property located in the left periphery. So Then the second question, is this marker found in Italian? I mean, where does it come from? And is it found in other languages? And the answer is yes. And this, now we're going to see standard Italian, modern Spanish, the diachronic development of Spanish, Balearic Catalan. And we'll see that in all these cases, A marking is a left peripheral phenomenon first. So in Italian, it's a very limited phenomenon, but it had been pointed out to us, meaning Luigi and myself, ages ago, when we were working on psych verbs, that the experiencer, the object experiencer of a psych verb of the worry class, the one that is marked accusative, if preposed, can be introduced by A. This was Paola Beninca who pointed out to us this example. A Gianni questi argomenti non l'hanno convinto. Can be more or less good, but that's fine for me too. And I speak the same variety of the children, okay? And there is a sharp contrast with, say, the other sentence, a Gianni la gente non lo conosce. This is no good. This has a southern flavor to us, okay? Namely, southern varieties of Italian are differential object marking languages. So they mark the object with A also in object position. So this is how it sounds to us. However, both convincere, psych verbs, and conoscere do not allow for the marking with A in object position. Okay, so that's interesting. An object experiencer, when it's preposed in the left periphery, can be A marked in Italian, in standard Italian. And also in standard Italian, A marking is quite, I would say, obligatory with first and second person pronouns. So when they are left dislocated, a me non mi si inganna, you don't say me non mi si inganna, although maybe at school they tell you that you should say me, but that's a long story, that's just out. And similarly, a te, and to me, also a lui and a noi, it works the same way. Okay, so we'd say with pronouns in particular, first and second person. Now, clearly, and this was, I mean, I enjoy telling you about this because I had a real discovery pleasure when working on this topic a few years ago, namely the discovery that the our children's behavior was robustly attested cross-linguistically and diachronically. So it often happens that in acquisition during their development, children typically adopt grammatical options that are manifested in the grammar of some existing language. So in part, this is already Italian, but in very, very limited way. More so Spanish, and Leonetti pointed out that the left dislocated that direct object is obligatorily A marked in Spanish. Same has been shown for other languages, for instance, Sicilian, here I mentioned, with the same exactly characteristics. Interestingly, the Leonetti's observation is that the A marking of the left dislocated object is obligatory, even in cases in which it could be optional, close internally. So this means that the left dislocated topic is, object topic is not just an object. This is an observation to keep in mind.
Less than 10 minutes.
Yes, I will rush. Okay, so this is Spanish. This is Spanish in diachrony, so that the seed, I like this result, so I tell you, sorry. 80% in work by Oisinger and Laca of animate direct objects were not A marked in object position, but 73 were A marked when they were preposed, okay? So again, a property that really resembles what Italian children have been doing. Balearic Catalan, I mean, I discovered that our children were speaking actually Balearic Catalan because Balearic Catalan is not a dumb language, but you can, and maybe you prefer to A mark the object in topic position. So exactly what our children did, and these are the example of Balearic Catalan. So there is a kind of effectiveness related to differential object marking in Spanish, both physical and psychological. So I'm rushing a bit. So the proposal here is that maybe the A marking of the topic is the manifestation of a property located in the left periphery, and in particular, this marking with A adds some further feature to the topic, okay? Maybe a feature of affectedness, maybe a feature of empathy following an insight by Valentina Bianchi at some point. But I want to make a comparative detour, take the time to make a comparative detour now between A and tu in English. So a is the same preposition that in Italian introduces the benefactive argument of transitive verbs. So, for instance, ho comprato un vestito ai bambini, farò una festa ai bambini. Again, there is a tight relation between the benefactive interpretation and affectiveness, and this also concerns causative. I mean, there are ramifications, very interesting ones, which I won't touch upon at all. Okay, now English. Tu cannot express a benefactive interpretation in English. So I both addressed to the kids. To my surprise, it sounds perfect to me, but it's very bad. I will do a party to the kids. They built a house to their family. You want to have 4 in English here. You cannot have 2. Okay, so there is a prediction here, and I hope at some point I will make this experiment. So what do children do in English in the same elicitation conditions? Certainly, we don't expect 2 topics in English, which is interesting to check. But okay, however, as I've been pointed out recently, in adult English, we have contrasts like 1 and 2. So I both the kids address. So in a double object construction, the goal, it's fine to have a kind of benefactive interpretation of the goal when it is the recipient of the theme, as in the case of buy. But I will do to the kids, I will do the kids a party. That's bad. So there is a contrast between the 2, apparently very sharp for native speakers. But very interestingly, if in the impossible one, we have preposing of, so we have left dislocation in Ross's terms of the object, then something like the kids, I'll do them a party, becomes good. I mean, much better. And so this has been pointed out to me by a reviewer, and I am very grateful, because this is an extremely parallel type of situation as the one we have seen for Italian-speaking children, namely a marking or the relevant feature in the left periphery, but not close internally. Okay, so let me skip. Now I'm going to skip several things, but I think that things are sufficiently clear. So that's the hypothesis I'm going to make. So there is a feature that is expressed through preposition a, that it's associated with the topic position, and this starts out in the left periphery, and then it may be associated with the low topic, and this is probably the DOM and all the constraints that often go with DOM, that you want to be specific and definite and particular conditions, so that go well with the topic interpretation. And then maybe there is a last stage in which instead the process is completely grammaticalized, and the marking becomes part of the case agreement system. And this is probably also correlates with the fact that the case, if there is an overt manifestation, would be the dative, whereas so until here, I should have mentioned that clearly and explicitly, when we have the left dislocation of the atopic, the resumptive clitic is the accusative clitic, always, okay? Much as in the Spanish examples. Okay, So according to what we have been saying, then we can say that Italian-speaking children are at the first stage of this path with no widely attested A marking in the periphery, but no marking in the close internal position, much as in Balearic Catalan. So we have an overextension of the atopic option in topic option of standard non-Southern Italian in the children's production in at least two ways. All their atopics were lexical noun phrases. They were not pronouns because we didn't have pronouns in the elicitation experiment. And all they are, of their atopics were object of patients, of agentive verbs. They were not object experiencers. So they were not the cases that are possible in Italian. So, as I said, there are the two possible orders. Now we want to say, okay, they overextended. Now in the remaining few minutes, I will tell you, I will raise the right question. So why so? Okay, they are overextending. They are overextending in a way that is found cross-linguistically in closely related languages. But why are they doing so? Okay. In either order. Notice that the elicitation situation was such where both the object and the subject were lexical noun phrases. So an account in terms of the feature relativized minimality along the lines I described earlier suggests itself. And in particular, the main insight is going to be that the atopics allow children to deal with the intervention configuration that arises in the clitic-left dislocation structure by resorting to a situation of featural intersection between the two noun phrases, so the object and the subject, or the subject and the object, a relation that for independent work is known to be mastered well by children at this age. So if we take the different set-related relation, the inclusion one is not mastered, as we said in the first part of our discussion, whereas it's okay, maybe harder for adults, but intersection is mastered. So the idea is that by saying il coniglio all'orso or all'orso il coniglio, a situation of feature intersection is created so that the intervening configuration that we see here with both orders is somehow modulated and the structure becomes handleable, okay, manageable by children. So a simple topic with no A marking would yield the inclusion, impossible for them to master. We know for work on other A-bar dependencies, say object relatives, as we mentioned before. So l'orso il coniglio lo veste, impossible, but all'orso il coniglio lo veste, intersection, fine. Okay? So that's the idea. So that's the why question, the big why, given the answer to the sub-question. So I think that we can talk in terms of a case of grammatical creativity against an otherwise poor input. So children have an extended use of atopic in a creative way. So they're not only able to use the left periphery properly, but also, as I said at the beginning, in a way that is creative. And despite the poor and limited evidence, they have picked up a grammatical option that has allowed them to cope with an otherwise too complex structure for them to compute due to intervention. So children's linguistic behavior, that was our last question, was not at random, but it took place within a defined grammatical space. And if you're right, in this case, it occurred under the pressure of locality. Now, just one further quick indication comes from the other results that I like to show you. So this is the one that we have seen already, namely 88% of clitic left dislocation had the atopic. In all these cases, and only 12% had the simple topic, so with no A. In all these cases, the subject of the clause following the left dislocated topic was lexical and preverbal. Sometimes, and this was fine from the point of view of the discourse conditions, but sometimes children produce null subjects and or postverbal subjects, which were not very appropriate, but they did so, not in many cases, but in some cases, enough to allow us to see that when the subject was null or post-verbal, sometimes the topic was simple, sometimes it was unmarked. So this means that the conditions for unmarking were still there, but they were not overused because the problem of intervention was, if you want, solved otherwise, okay? And this is just to show that with the post-verbal subject and the null subject, there is no intervention. And then just to conclude, atopics, not unexpectedly, were fully comprehended by children. So this was a comprehension experiment. And so in 83% of the cases, they were fully comprehended, that all children did comprehend the topics, okay? So again, production and comprehension go hand in hand, which is something which is expected if grammar is involved in both cases. And then I'll stop here. These are just some concluding considerations that we may skip and you draw them by yourself. Okay. I hope I didn't take too much time over.
No, you didn't. We have plenty of time for discussion. Professor, plenty. People are asking for your PowerPoint. If you could.
Yes.
Share your PowerPoint with us. Would be great, yes. Because
I will. Sure.
Okay, so we have a question by Clara.
Hello, thanks for this presentation. I was wondering whether these results by children, whether you interpret them as just like children's grammar or as a development of this variety of Italian. I'm asking this because there is a friend of mine, Ankur Singh in Cambridge. He's studying the emergence of DOM in northern varieties of Italian. So I was wondering whether this could be actually not just like a children's grammar thing, but like a broader.
Yes, absolutely. And it probably, I don't know, I have the intuition that it probably is, but hard to measure. And what I mean, in a few generations, maybe not that long, but maybe you will see unmarking or DOM in standard Italian. The important thing is that, the nice thing is that it goes precisely, say, like the diachrony of Spanish that we have seen. And this is remarkable to me.
Thank you.
Mara?
Hi, Adriana. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
Just, taking a suggestion from what you have just said about, the use of our marking in adults. When you were just, saying this data for children, well, it might be interesting to tell you that now, some years ago, when I was writing my PhD dissertation using the Mauro corpus of data, so reading everything, looking for foci and topics, I could exactly find it. And I was kind of astonished at that time to see that. But what is interesting is that I can tell you, I still have those notes in my computer that you know how big it is, the corpus of the Mauro. I could only find that for first and second person, so a me e a te, never ever with a lui e a lei, and never ever with a full DP. So something like a Mario, a Luigi, so just a me questo non sta bene, a te. So it was exactly a feature of first and second person. So one could really think if this grammatical grammaticalization in standard Italian, which I think can happen in some years, is connected with, we know the particularity of these two person, first and second person, but also at those times, I was also thinking could be also some type of prosodic support, since it is a contrastive import that you have. I was thinking that just have to a monosyllabic thing that was me et te was too light to be used like that with a contrast in the left periphery of the sentence. While Louis already has a diphthong and then, full nouns. So at those times I was also thinking that prosody could also have its portion of importance in the selection of first and second person with this R marking. And this is what it's not a question, but just something that I wanted to, I think it can be interesting to tell you and to everybody. Thanks.
Absolutely, that's very interesting. I mean, the description I gave of Italian, saying that it's limited to experiencer when it's a lexical noun phrase of, and that it's obligatory. I mean, to me, it's just obligatory with first and second person, despite normative sanctions. For some reason, there is a normative sanction on me, in particular for the first person. Nobody ever understood why.
Never ever.
Yes, but so this is something that it's what you say. It's interesting because I gave a description based on my judgments, on by the checking with other speakers and so on. But the fact that you found these results from a corpus study indicates that in a way it's a limited kind of phenomenon that. In that sense, children overextend. And notice that what children do, maybe for the first and second person of standard Italian, the prosody plays a role, although in Northern variety, I don't think they amark the first pronoun. If you say, me non mi prendono di sicuro, it sounds from the north to me, much as a Gianni lo conosco sounds from the south to me. So, I mean, this is just a comment, but children, I mean, the results from children had this overextension in the sense that they mark the lexical object, which is quite interesting. So the one that you did not find, and that also our intuition as native speakers makes that kind of, I want to wait my words, not common or something like that, you know? And the reason why I don't say marginal or anything like that is that, I mean, it's probably marginal in some sense, but I asked, I had a questionnaire to adult Italian speakers, non-Southern Italian speakers, and then I will tell you an anecdote. And the adult said, okay, that's no good, but it's not shocking. So that's interesting, and it makes sense, because if that's an option, if that's a grammatical possibility, it's just a matter of having access to it or not. I mean, to practice it or not. But so I found that was interesting from speakers from Northern Italian varieties who said that. Okay, and the anecdote, very briefly, because I see there is another question, is the fact that when I presented the first time, I presented this type of results in the audience to Italian linguists. In the audience, there were speakers of southern varieties of Italians just staring at me, saying, but what is she talking about? I mean, what's the problem? These are normal sentences, but for them, also dumb is normal. So the marking in object position, and this is the contrast that I think is important. Yes.
So Ivano?
To everybody, and thank you very much, Adriana, for your beautiful talk. And I'm glad that Mara asked that question, because my question is directly related. While you were talking and we were presenting the data, and then Mara was elaborating, I was thinking, as somebody who was born and grew up in Milan, so speaks that kind of variety with parents from the South, that if I agree that with the pronouns a te, a me, I need to have a, but then I was thinking, what happens if you have to coordinate? So if you have to say something like to you, well, to you and to Paolo, I know you very well. A te, a Paolo, vi conosco bene.
Mm-hmm.
And there, note, I do have a contrast if I flip the order. A Paolo e a te, vi conosco bene, that doesn't sound as good anymore.
It's probably because you like to, anyway, to have the heavier late, I mean.
Probably, but in any case, it sounds to me that, like in that case, when you have coordination, the pronoun manages, so the presence of a pronominal element, and this was also while I was thinking, well, Mara was talking, as a potential answer to Mara, because if this data is confirmed by other speakers, and if you share this intuition, then it's a little bit more productive than we think. It cannot be just some frozen forms that we put at the very beginning of the sentence, but if coordination allows you to expand, and you go from a pronominal form, you can coordinate with a non-pronominal form, with a full nominal, or maybe even something that is not just a name, maybe even richer than a name, then it must be a more productive mechanism. I just wanted to suggest this piece of data. Thank you.
This is very interesting, and I mean it's a nice observation, and also thinking of it in the following terms. A te e Gianni non li conosco. That's very weird. You want to repeat the a. But this is not the case with prepositions in general. You can say con te e Gianni non ci parlo or something like that. So this probably indicates that this is like I mean, it's a preposition because Italian has this, but it's not a preposition in the same sense. So it's probably a marker of some property, maybe this affectedness or empathy or these features. Okay, thank you. That's.
But if I may say something about this Italian that I don't know, with the with, you can have this conjoined interpretation with me and John together, but if I understood the a, it has to be disjunct. A me e a Gianni, they cannot be together.
No.
Yeah, I don't know, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay, if we don't have any more questions, thank you, Professor. It was a really nice talk, and we want the...
Thank you. Thank you. I'll send you
the handout.
The handout, yes, yes. In a minute, we'll be there.
Okay, and now we have break for lunch for us, dinner for you, and we'll be back to 1:30 for me, 7:30 for you, very late, right? Okay.
Right.
So see you soon back.
Bye.
Bye.